Hello, Huw Turbervill here again, editor of the Cricketer magazine. Huw Meets, my series on YouTube. I have a special guest today, Mr. Jarrod Kimber, legend of the game.
You paused. I didn't know what you were going to say.
Legend
I was like, Jarrod Kimber. Now, who's he again? Why is he on this show?
legend
Did he
of
just click on this link by accident?
you are a different kind of journalist, aren't you? You're a numbers, stats, analysis fiend, aren't you?
I suppose these days I started as a feature writer, didn't I?
Yeah.
So I suppose I've done a few different things, documentaries as well along the way. I just like to find things out, and whether it's a deep research into, I'm currently trying to work out how attacking Clem Hill was, because all those early 1900s statisticians are really obsessed with those sorts of things. But just as obsessed with, other facets of the game, like, the history of cricket and things like that. So once I get obsessed with something, Huw, I take it very far.
Well, that's similar. I'm into the Apollo missions at the moment, so I'm getting obsessed by that. But but you're very. What I think you are, you're so incredibly resourceful, aren't you? And you're clever with all the graphics you do on X, formerly Twitter, and it's just really sort of resourceful, aren't you? So you're a real rounder, I think. Well, you were saying you started as a feature writer. What was that for, an Australian newspaper, or?
That was for your magazine.
Yeah. Okay. So you didn't do any journalism in Australia?
No. My first journalism was for, it was the Wisden Cricketer back then, when I worked for it. So what was that, 2008, I think?
Yeah.
I was writing on my blog and just writing.
We're not listening anymore, by the way, just to clarify, because people still get mixed up. But we are.
Sorry, everyone. Yeah,
that's
but
fine.
It's so confusing because that name has jumped around the magazine so many times.
There's no reply. Anyway, so
I and they liked my blog and they said, "Do you want to be a cricket writer?" And I was like, I hadn't really thought of being a cricket writer. So I think my first piece was on the Hussey brothers. David Hussey was killing it for knots at the time, and Mike Hussey was obviously averaging about 1 million. The Cricketer asked me to write for that. So I started writing features there, and then got picked up with Cricinfo a couple of years later. Again, more as as a video guy as much as anything in those days, and then also a feature writer. And I probably just get bored, if we're being honest. And so I think I'm very famous in certain markets for writing in one way, and then with other people for writing in a completely different way. So there's a lot of people who only know me for my feature writing. There's a lot of people that only know me for podcasting and videos. There's a lot of people that only know me for numbers and analysis. But truthfully, it's whatever is interesting me that day is the thing that I will follow. And that's kind of how I've built my career, I suppose, and largely accidentally, but still.
Well, there's a bit of a sort of Hunter Thompson aspect to your writing, isn't there? Is it S. Hunter Thompson or H. Hunter Thompson or
Hunter S. Thompson?
Hunter S. Thompson, that's it. Yeah, it's sort of it's sort of explosion of ideas, isn't it?
So there's a new theory going around that one of the reasons that the modern Star Wars films and the modern Simpsons are not as good is because it's written by people who have watched the Simpsons and have watched Star Wars. And so instead of having these incredible different voices coming in and writing these movies, they're being written by fans of the franchises or of the TV show. And most cricket writers are fans of cricket writing. All right, that's what they do. They read cricket writing, they want to be a cricket writer, and then they become that. I just didn't do that. I wasn't planning on being a cricket writer. I love lots of different writers like Harlan Ellison and Nick Cave and these sort of random alternative books and love screenplays. Read a lot of screenplays, and that's what I wanted to become, was a screenwriter. So when I wrote, I thought I was writing normal cricket stuff, and it's only when other people started contacting me going, "What is this? What are you doing?" So it never really, I didn't pick it up for the first little while. It was just that was how I talked about cricket with my friends. And if you look at my writing style, it probably is a little bit more. It's probably why I'm a podcaster as well. Is because I write in a sort of a more verbal way. Whereas you look at especially a lot of the famous Indian and English writers, they really write prose. There's a real purpose to their sentences, whereas mine's a little bit more immediate and a little bit more off the wall, because I was, supposed to be writing screenplays at this stage and accidentally ended up writing cricket. So yeah, it is very different. And also, I never finished high school or went to university. So my writing was completely self-taught. So again, even from a traditional aspect, it's not like I ever knew what I was doing. It just kind of worked for me and followed the way that I like to tell stories. And then when I get bored with that, I rip that up and I go off to the next style that I'm now currently obsessed with, and then the next style and the next style. So it's very different, I think, than most people's, but it's not on purpose. I'm not like, oh, I wanted to come in and change cricket writing forever. It was like, I thought I was writing like, Ray Robertson or Gideon Haigh or Robert Craddock, and it turned out, I was nothing like Crash.
Okay. Well, I've got several questions that spring to mind. I'm following the philosophy actually of you in this interview because a friend of mine called Tom Maslona attended one of your classes, and he said don't go to an interview with a load of questions, just go with one question and then let the conversation go organically. So I've thought of what you're from Melbourne, are you originally? Or yeah, what were you doing for livelihood then when you started doing cricket writing in 2008 or whatever?
So I worked for a call center. I worked for Qantas in a call center from about 2000 until 2007. And in 2007, I actually got promoted to be a supervisor, and I did it for about 6 months, and I was quite good at the job, and I enjoyed it. And I thought to myself, if this is it, I don't want to do this. If this is what this is, I've always said I'm a writer. I've always said I wanted to become a writer. I'm now 26, 27, whatever I was at that stage. I'm just going to go off. And so I did a bunch of like small courses in filmmaking to begin with. I ended up getting into a film school, and I just quit my job. So when I started my blog, which was 2007, if I remember correctly, I was either unemployed or I was parking cars for a living in the city. So, when you double park cars in the big car parking garages, so you would chuck your keys to me, Huw, and I would, go off with your Lamborghini and make sure I didn't scratch it on the side of the of the wall. And I was doing that at the time, but I had just enough success with some weird little projects where I was like, I think I know what I'm doing. I just have to find my thing. And I thought it was going to be in filmmaking. I made a couple of small documentaries that, showed at little festivals and things. And we started to make some TV ads with our company as well. There's a few, 3 of us in our collective, and things were going in that direction. But there was, when you're doing film production, especially on that level, you kind of get a job and you get paid nicely, but then you don't get another job for a couple of months. So you have to fill the gaps. And every one of us went off and filled the gap in a different way. And mine was, I'll just write about cricket, because a friend of mine was a basketball blogger and he knew I had blogged before. And then that just exploded. I think I started in September or October of 2007. And then probably by January of 2008, I was the biggest cricket blogger in the world. And it changed my life like in 3 or 4 months. And there were some lucky things that happened, like the Australia-India series happened, where, the Andrew Simons and, all those sorts of things happen. And what I was just lucky, I was writing about the cricket and how ridiculous both sides would be. Everyone else in cricket media was writing from an Australian opinion or from an Indian opinion. And I just happened to be in the middle going, why is Anil Kumble saying this? Why is Ricky Ponting doing this? Why is everyone acting like they're 12 years old when, it's a test match? And the blog just flew off. So yeah, at that stage, I was probably on the path to, I don't know, we made a couple of small ads, we made a couple of small music videos, and I probably would have made some documentaries. And then hopefully, eventually someone would have given me money for a screenplay to make a movie that no one would have watched, which was the dream.
I just need to get one thing out of the way. When you said about Star Wars, Lawrence Kasdan wrote Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, but he wrote The Force Awakens and Solo, a Star Wars story as well. So he was one of the old Star Wars writers. So he wasn't a new Star Wars writer.
I love that you. What I more mean is that even when he's writing now, he's still writing, looking back at what Star Wars is.
Well, certainly pastiche, wasn't it? Whereas
so what was George Lucas before he was a screenwriter? Do you know? What did he study?
Oh God, I know he did the film THX or something. No, I don't know.
So he studied archaeology.
Did he really?
So he was obviously inspired by Japanese samurai movies. He was inspired by, you look at Indiana Jones, it was inspired by little things as well. But he was also inspired by civilizations and everything else.
Okay.
and that is where Star Wars really comes from, is looking at things in the world and bringing them back. Whereas if you look at modern Star Wars, even when Lawrence Kasdan starts to write it, he's more looking at what Star Wars is now, right? And
isn't Star Wars New Hope a remake of Wizard of Oz? Anyway, we're probably going on a tangent here. I do remember your style of writing upsetting one old school journalist, didn't he? That was
he wrote a copy for you guys, didn't he? And he was
I'm trying to let it through. I mean, I'm not one of these people who interfere with people's columns, so yeah, we had a little bit of
well, let's talk about that. I forget the guy's name, but I know he's a famous old grumpy cricket writer. But it was a perfect example of, he said that what I did wasn't journalism, right? Because he read one particular article that wasn't particularly a journalistic article. It was no different to the many, many articles that Neville Cardis had written before that were flowery nonsense. I was just writing it in a different way. But in his idea of my article not being journalism, he also called my piece a match report, which meant that he didn't spend the 10 seconds needed to have a look to see that ESPN Cricinfo that day actually had another match report on. So
just a color
okay. It's okay to for some other people to not get everything I do. You know, I can tell you there's been a lot of cricketers and a lot of cricket administrators who are very upset with certain things and the way I phrase things. And, you know, when you write in the kind of way that I do, which tends to be a little bit more dramatic than a standard sports writer, you're going to upset people and you're going to bother people. But my job is to try and get to the truth, whether that be in any way that I can, and try and explain what it was like to watch that innings, or why that person made that innings, or whatever. You can't be right in sports writing, because one of the first things I learned when I was an analyst with the cricket team was something happened on the field. And I went and talked to 4 different players on the field about what had happened. And they had 4 different stories, right? So at that stage, what is the truth? If I was writing about it from my vantage point, I would have been roughly correct. But one player would have said I was completely incorrect. And 3 other players would have said, I think, yeah, he's more or less got the facts right there. We are sitting 80 meters away from people, and sometimes we do get things wrong, and sometimes we do over romanticize things that we love, and sometimes we're having a bad day and a cricketer plays a bad shot, so we put the boot in when realistically, maybe we shouldn't. But I try and put the work in, right? And that's the thing for me. As long as I put the work in and try my best to get the best thing I can out there, I don't care if some old cricket writer who has never met me and has no idea who I am has a problem with one particular article. They're allowed to. Old people get grumpy, Huw. I don't know if you've ever met any, but they really do.
Finding out, looking in the mirror every day. But no, it's cricket is a broad church. Cricket writing is a broad church, and there's room for all different styles. And I enjoy your articles and graphics and analysis, which leads me into one of the reasons why you're here, which is we're going to be doing more regular stuff for the Cricketer magazine. So that's going to make its debut, your sort of monthly column, hopefully monthly. You're happy with that, aren't you?
I thought you were about to say, actually, Jarrod, it's not going to be monthly. No.
Yeah, that'll be out on July the 12th. So a regular monthly fusion, really, of stats and ideas and graphics and words, and anybody who's sort of familiar with your output on X, I think will enjoy it, won't they? And it's something different.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't want to get too here, Huw, but I kind of see myself as a storyteller rather than anything else. As I said before, I think I write in a very, spoken word way, and that's because I was taught storytelling by spoken word people. I was very lucky to have some incredible storytellers in my life when I was growing up. And so I look at myself as a storyteller. So for me, the graphics are just another way of telling the story, the same way that the words are, or the same way that, a pause on a podcast might be, right? It's all just part of you trying to tell the best story possible. And it's great for me to come back to the cricketer. As I said, it's where it all began. It was my first ever journalistic foray into the world. And so it's awesome to have a monthly column, unless you take away that offer, which it looks like you're still thinking.
No, I'm not going to. No, I was just thinking you've done some pieces for us over the last few years. So it's not like you're completely coming back fresh, but yeah, no, it'd be really good. Right, now this is what I want to ask you, and I don't want you to make it out. I mean, I admit that I'm a little bit of I'm obviously a traditionalist. Okay, I'm a little bit. I don't think I'm a Luddite. I don't think I'm a dinosaur. I do like T20. I like playing T20. I like watching it. I just want some Test cricket, red ball cricket to sit alongside it. I don't want T20 to consume Test cricket or first class cricket. You're clearly passionate about T20. What do you think about people like me saying that they want a balance, or what do you? What do you think about people who say, "Oh, T20 is baseball," or "T20 is clear the front leg and smash it out of the park"? What? I mean, clearly you have a feel for it, a passion for it.
Yeah, I think of all three formats as three different sports, and I think Test cricket's my favorite sport, T20 is my second favorite sport, and probably basketball's my third favorite sport, and ODI is not far behind.
Right.
So for me, they're all different sports, and they all offer different experiences. I don't know how you got into professional cricket. I got into cricket through my family, so my family played cricket. So it was only years later that I realized, oh, there was this other thing that you could go to grounds and watch like professionals play. So I got into cricket by club cricket, right? And club cricket is great and I love it. And it's still a really important part of who I am and everything else. But then Test cricket comes along. But I only got into Test cricket because I followed Victoria in 50 over cricket. That was my first foray into professional cricket. So firstly, T20 cricket can be a similar gateway, and I'm sure limited overs cricket over the last 30 years has been a gateway to Test cricket anyway, right? It's a more accessible version of the game. So I have trouble with anyone telling me that T20 cricket isn't cricket if it's bringing in more cricket fans, more people who care about the game, more people who want to play it, who want to watch it, who want to talk about it, then that's already better for me. I can understand your point. I think I remember interviewing John Inverarity. Like, I'm the guy who's made the film about about whether Test cricket might die.
Just for gender.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we interviewed John Inverarity in that, the legendary Warwickshire, Western Australia player, coach, administrator, whatever, all those different roles that he did. And he was like, and he said something along the lines of, well, we don't have gladiators anymore. Like, some things just die, right? Some things just stop and they are no longer popular anymore. And I think we have a very narrow understanding of what history is. I can tell you as a historian of our game that cricket was a street game, right? That's the origins of cricket. It's not Test cricket. Test cricket comes way later, right? Cricket is a street game, and
on the downs of Sussex and the Wealds of Sussex and Kent.
Well, yeah, if you want to go back, that was, if you really want to go back to the start, cricket was played probably by women, and it probably evolves out of a sport called stool ball. But that's how far back cricket goes.
Yeah.
But it's a street game is where it gets popular around, outside of the Kent Sussex area. It's on the streets and kids playing it and adults playing it and one-on-one games and 3-on-3 games and 5-on-5 games and then 15-on-15 and 26-on-12 and all these different things. We have convinced ourselves that Test cricket is the only version of cricket that matters. And I don't think that's true. And I don't think it was ever true. That doesn't mean it's not the best format and it's not the most challenging and it's not the most interesting, because I still think all those things compared to T20 cricket. But T20 cricket is still fascinating and is developing. We've just had a tournament in the IPL where at one stage it looked like the pass score was going to be 240. And now we've got a World Cup where it looks like the pass score is 93, right? Even within T20, there is black, there's white, there's gray, there's all these different shades of everything. So there's still genius within that. But let's not pretend that if Test cricket is going to stay, part of it needs to be administrated a lot better, which is why I think it should be separated as a sport, but that's a whole different chat. But regardless of that, people have to keep wanting to go and watch it and to like it. And if that doesn't happen, well, that's fine. That's what society has decided. You and I will be very, very sad. I love the way that action movies were made in the late 80s and early 90s. They were, a lot more brutal. Like, there's a very random reference when we're talking about Test cricket, but RoboCop 2, right? You watch RoboCop when they remade it, and they couldn't make it like the original RoboCop because it was so sick and wrong and twisted and weird, right? And you couldn't make a Hollywood mainstream movie like that at that stage. And so when they remake it, they make it completely different. So the movies that I grew up watching in the late 80s, early 90s are never going to exist anymore, right? They're going to be different by design. That doesn't mean that there won't be great movies coming through and great different kinds of genres and great different kinds of directors and everything else that will come through and will move that forward. right? That's a perfectly acceptable thing that society does, right? We can't just hold on to things from the old days. And cricket's biggest issue, really, is holding on to things that sometimes are not even true, like as in the spirit of cricket and amateurism. It's like, we've got to get those things back. And it's like, well, both of them are basically nonsense when you drill down on them even a millimeter, right? But we do that a lot in cricket. But the truth is that the world does move on, and that cricket will move on. And for me, if cricket didn't exist in 40 years' time, I'd be heartbroken, right? Because it changed my life, this sport, right? And I personally would have a huge issue with that. But if there are forms of cricket and people are still playing a different version of it, and it has changed, and it is still helping people and still bringing people together and still doing wonderful things, who am I to say, well, my favorite part of it doesn't exist anymore, so therefore it's dead? I just don't think that's fair, because I grew up in a particular era when Test cricket was king, and my kids are not going to grow up in that era, right? And in 2 and 3 generations' time, who even knows if Test cricket will be around from that point of view? But that's how the world works, and there's a natural thing. And I know we all look back and we say this period was great, and then when we actually, it's that running joke about music, right? You ask 100 people what the best era for music is, and 95 of them will say the era between the age of them being 13 and 25. Right? And
yeah. Okay. So this is, but Test cricket in England is still popular. It's well attended, and it still represents the lion's share of the Sky TV contract. So it just feels to me and us and people like me, it just feels like people are ignoring that and just sort of sweeping red ball cricket under the. Like you need a functioning county championship to provide players for the Test side, and it just feels it's being squeezed out. I mean, only yesterday, I'm dating this interview. Only recently, I found out about this new Max 60 in the Cayman Islands and the Bengal Pro T20 leagues. I mean, there's just not going to be room for longer cricket, Test cricket. There's not going to be the players for it, is there?
Do you want me to get down the administration path here, right? It would be very silly.
You told me you only had X minutes, but we've gone way past that. So
it would be very silly of cricket to let Test cricket die because it does make money, right? Like, it would be a stupid decision, because T20 is really popular now. What if in 20 years it's not? Like 30 years ago, do you remember when we were told ODI cricket?
Yeah. I mean, in the 1992 World Cup, everybody was saying ODIs would take over Test cricket, and yeah.
Right, and Test cricket's now bigger and healthier than ODI cricket is, right?
Yeah.
So you'd be very silly to let it go. But the future really is, Huw, of separating them. They are 3 different sports. Now, will that mean that you will feel that Test cricket isn't as good in the short term? Probably, because maybe 25% of cricketers will go to red ball cricket, and the other 75% will go to T20 cricket, right? And so you probably will be like, well, it's not as good as it used to be. But if it still exists and it plays, like, I wasn't around when rugby league and rugby union split, right? But I'm pretty sure at that point when there was a split, it meant that rugby union wasn't quite as strong as it had been before, because a lot of really good rugby union players went over to play rugby league, right? And so over time, who gives a crap, right? But when it first happened, I'm sure it was absolutely massive. And you see it in motor car racing, right? All these different guys sometimes, switching around which kinds of cars that they drive in and which kinds of competitions that they drive in and all that sort of stuff. We eventually just accept that as the new norm. So one day, perhaps there could be, out of the 100% of cricketers in the world, maybe 20 to 25% of them play red ball cricket and 80% of them play white ball cricket. I know that red ball cricket is still profitable, because I was told this by TV executives years ago when cable TV was around of, do you know how good it is to have a sport that goes for 5 days that the same customers are going to come back to every single day because of the way the narrative unfurls, right? You don't get that in many other sporting leagues, right? On top of that, that was before streaming came about. Test cricket is made for streaming. It's exactly what streaming platforms want. You're going to be watching it for 7 hours, and then tomorrow you're going to come back and watch it for 7 hours again, and then 2 more days, and maybe a 5th day if it doesn't rain or the teams aren't bowled out for 83, right? It actually fits in modern world. So it would be silly for cricket to let Test cricket die, right? And it's also, but it's equally silly for people who just go out there and go, well, it's the best format, so it should live forever. I mean, Tom Waits is a better singer than Justin Bieber. Who sold more albums, right? Like, at a certain point, money actually matters. And I think it always has in cricket, right? And so
he sells more than the Ivy or something. I don't know. fine dining, whatever. I mean, it's not, it's,
No, but
it's
that's
we like the
what
junk.
pays for it. Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's what pays. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think there's, especially in English cricket, there's, because of the way it was written about traditionally, there's this whole idea that people always played for the love of the sport and, they were involved. And it's like, well, WG Grace got paid more than the professionals did, right? The professionals were paid. Money has always been a part of cricket. From the minute we put a fence up at the Oval, which I think was the first major ground to put a fence up, we said that cricket was about people coming and paying to watch it, right? And it has always been that way. And it is disingenuous the way that we talk about cricket and the amateur days, because they're not true, right? Cricket and money have always gone hand in hand. That's no different back in the old days than it is now. The difference was, in the old days, WG Grace was the biggest sporting star in the world. Cricket was the biggest draw in the world. Even in countries where cricket wasn't that big, you could get big crowds along to matches. It was just a huge thing. It's now very different, and it's a very different situation that we're coming to. And on top of that, for the first time ever, pretty much since, 1870s, we opened cricket up to private investment. And from the moment we've opened cricket up to private investment, that has meant that it's hurtling towards this new direction that you don't want, because it's not the cricket you grew up with, right?
I just want a balance.
You came from.
I just want a balance. I don't want it to consume my Test cricket. I think it's a good format. It's exciting, but I just don't want it to be everything. I don't want a diet purely of Mickey D's or.
Well, let's go to McDonald's, because McDonald's is almost my favorite reference to this.
Don't get stupid by McDonald's. I like McDonald's, all right, everybody.
No. I mean, this is positive of McDonald's. McDonald's get famous really on the back of the Big Mac, right? That's the thing that everyone knows of McDonald's. I've got no numbers to back this up of recent times, but I looked into this about 5 or 6 years ago. Sales of Big Macs around the world went down, right? Because, the Quarter Pounder got very popular, and they have chicken burgers and fish burgers, and different parts of the world don't even eat beef, right? So, there are different meals that McDonald's have that are now, do very well for them. But McDonald's didn't dump the Big Mac, right? They understood that it actually meant something else. It was a brand identity for them, and it was something that a lot of their core customers liked, right? Test cricket is the Big Mac, right? There will be better burgers in the future. There will be, bigger sellers. There will be, better ways to market McDonald's into the future. But you could still put, a picture up of people in whites with a red ball, and people who don't even follow cricket know what that means, right? It stands for something, right? And in a world of brands and logos and everything else, players wearing white at Lord's looks like something that doesn't look like other things. There's a reason why Wimbledon has kept on with their traditions as well, right? Because those things are now worth a lot of money. And to bring it all the way back to Star Wars, it's that similar kind of thing of you are trying to keep that legacy alive, because it turns out that you didn't have to just make 3 Star Wars films. You can now have 23 different animated comics, cartoons and everything else, because of that one big thing. Test cricket is still a part of the overall thing. And what you're saying is you don't want it to be minimalized, right? You don't want it to end up completely, unimportant. And what I'm saying is that that's the bit we can't control, right? But the thing that we can control is the fact that it is actually making money, and I think Test cricket has more interest now than it's ever had before, when you look at the amount of people who will look at scorecards and will be, watching highlights and everything else. And part of that is just the way the internet has changed. The thing that has happened is that another format of cricket has got bigger, more popular, and is easier to sell to casual fans, right? So why would you get rid of your hardcore fans just for casual fans? Because you can never trust casual fans into the future, whereas hardcore fans are always going to be there. So it would be a silly mistake for whether it be Test cricket or first class cricket to completely die from a business point of view. You don't need to be romantic about cricket at this point. I'm talking about brands and business and customer loyalty, right? And that's where cricket keeps making short-term decisions, like certain political parties, every political party, and what they really should be doing is looking about what Test cricket means in 20 years' time, what the 50-over World Cup. I mean, there's plenty of rumors going around the 50-over World Cup that we both also grew up with might not be around in a couple of years. And that the broadcasters have already said, do we have to do the full 100 overs? Can't we just go to this 2020 thing, right? So 2 institutions of cricket are under damage, and yet One of them just sold for, one of them is worth more than $1 billion in the last World Cup rights. And Test cricket is worth more now than it has ever been worth. So from a business point of view, it makes sense. If you just come up with me with nostalgia and you just come up with me with, well, when I grew up, I liked watching Test cricket, I'm not interested in that, right? Only because everyone is only interested in what they saw when they grew up. But if you come at me with, this is actually a really important thing for cricket in the future, and cricket as a sport, whether it be played on a maidan, in a backyard, on a beach or whatever, needs the professional game to keep the overall interest going, because it is something that can help nation building. It is something that can help individuals. It's a great sport to learn because it's something that can't be conquered. It's just a brilliant sport in so many different ways. And Test cricket is the version of that where it is at its most extreme and most dramatic. I'm with you. I'm completely with you. How do we build a system that does that? And what's currently happening is, of course, T20 cricket's making a lot of money. And so we're just going to go do a lot of stuff with that. And then maybe in a little while, we will come back and we'll see if that other thing's still alive. There's no reason for Test cricket to be run that way.
Well, I think we should round it up there. That's very good. The note to end it upon. So don't forget, you can read Jarrod's new column in The Cricketer in the August issue, which is out on July the 12th. And thanks very much indeed, Jarrod. Good to talk to you. I liked all the Star Wars chat, and those kittens next to you didn't look overly impressed by it all, but never mind. We can't please everyone, can we?
They're big T20 fans.
Right. Cheers, Jarrod. All the best.
Cheers, mate.